resources, is there a downturn? What are we seeing in prices so far? Is this going to suffer a hit as well?
World prices are holding up for iron ore and thermal coal and met coal, which is no surprise. But what we are doing is we're ensuring we're working very closely with state ministers and, of course, the industry itself and its representative bodies to make sure that the resources sector can continue to do what it's always done, and that's deliver desperately needed energy sources, whether that is thermal coal or gas, not only to the Australian domestic market, but right around the world. And they're doing a really good job, Tom, I've got to say. We are all working very closely together. And, of course, as the response changes, as the coronavirus spreads, and, of course, further restrictions are put in place, well, the industry responds to that as well.
What's in place at the moment to make sure these workers, in a large-scale sense, don't fall ill from COVID-19? Because presumably some of these skills are pretty hard to replace.
They certainly are. It's a highly skilled, highly paid, highly mobile workforce. The industry is doing a lot of things around direct charter aircraft, ensuring that there is separation distances when they're in buses and other forms of transport. In terms of the camps, they already had fairly advanced protocols in place because there are, on occasions, an outbreak of illness in a camp. That happens and has happened in the past. So they were fairly advanced in terms of their protocols there. They are all in place. The industry is doing temperature checks and a range of surveys, and they are looking at changes to shift rosters, relocating, pretty much everything that they need to do to ensure they maintain those assets and keep doing what they've been doing for a long time.
People might not think of it as an essential service, clearly, at least for the economy in some senses, and as you say, for energy, it is. So we hope that approach works well. I want to move on to a couple of broader issues, because there are a lot of massive decisions being made at the moment, Keith Pitt, particularly around this equation of the economy, sometimes, versus or weighing it up with the health of the nation. Should Australians get to see what this modelling is predicated on some of the big decisions the government has made?
Well, firstly, Tom, we are taking the absolute best advice available in terms of the health advice from the Chief Medical Officer and all of their staff, as are all of the states. So the National Cabinet, which, as you know, is made up of the Prime Minister and, of course, the state premiers and territory ministers, are meeting at least twice, if not 3 times a week, and they are making decisions based on that advice. So in terms of information, there's plenty that's out there. You can get on to the WhatsApp group. You can download an app which has become available this week. That gives you up-to-date information, particularly about your own location and what actions you can take. Because fundamentally, how this spreads, how the coronavirus spreads, is up to each and every one of us. It's our response that makes the difference.
Obviously, all these decisions being made, though, you talk about that advice. It would, for example, say, if we lock down things to this extent, the impact will be this on the economy and this on the health of the nation. These are the things we're not privy to at the moment. Should we be?
Well, the health of every individual Australian is our absolute priority. It's the reason we've taken the action that we have, and they've been very, very tough decisions. I know the impact that it's had on many businesses, tens of thousands of businesses right across the country. We are stepping up in terms of the economic response with the JobKeeper package this week, which hopefully will pass, it will pass through the Parliament next week. But, Tom, I mean, theoretical modelling is used all of the time by different individuals. This is not about the theory. Yeah. It's about what every single one of us can do to help every other individual. It is our response that determines what the rate of spread is.
I understand that, and certainly a lot in the community, I think, are taking this pretty seriously in the government. The PM's praised Australians as of last week, but you talk about theory and modelling. That's what's being used, isn't it? It's not just theory. This is modelling that's being put to the government, and they're making decisions based on that. Again, should Australians be privy to that information?
Tom, there's a lot of experts out there, as you know, but we are taking the absolute best advice available. It changes. This is a really fluid situation. It changes hourly, daily, weekly. And we are keeping up with that as best as we can, and we continue to make decisions in the national interest and in the
So is that the issue? The advice could keep changing. If something's released right now saying here's what we're doing, here's where we're tracking in terms of number of cases in Australia, and here's why we're doing it, and if it changes 2 days later, the public will say, well, what's happening? Is that the problem with releasing it?
Well, Tom, we continue to put out consistent advice on what individuals should be doing. There are very strict controls in place in terms of people staying at home unless they have to go to work, unless, of course, they go to the doctors or the pharmacy or for other essentials. Now, they are the important actions that each Australian needs to take. We clearly put out the numbers every single day, how many cases, what the spread is, and we're certainly focused on those clusters of outbreaks and, of course, tracing each individual who's been in contact with somebody else. Now, that seems to be working at the moment. There's been a reduction in terms of the curve, so we are flattening the curve. But whether that remains consistent is up to every Australian doing what's necessary. And I'd urge everyone watching your program, do what's being asked, wash your hands, keep up your hygiene practices, keep your separation distances. I know it's very tough and it's certainly a change in our social practice, but it's absolutely necessary.
How are things going in your electorate from what you see? I'm assuming you're keeping your movement a bit limited, but you're an MP that would get around a bit. What's morale like? How are people handling it?
People have been quite good. In fact, my office is making calls, as a lot of MPs' offices are, particularly those high-risk individuals that we have on our databases, just to check in, to see how they are, to see what they might need and how they're coping. And I've got to say the response has been very strong. People are upbeat, they understand the reason for the decisions, they know what it is that they have to do. In fact, one of my staff got a call yesterday from an individual who was a child post-World War II in Britain. And his message was, we'll do whatever we need to, and you ain't seen nothing yet, which I think was just a really upbeat piece from an individual who's self-isolated at home. They're obviously far more senior than many of us and in the high-risk category.
Yeah, I guess they might have seen and witnessed bombs falling from the air, so it puts that in perspective at least. What about civil liberties at the moment? I think a lot of Australians are very open to, tough penalties that we wouldn't be used to, for example, for flouting social distancing. But do states and police in particular need to be wary of going too far? Some of the reports of people being pursued for simply sitting on a park bench and so on. Do we need to be cautious about pushing people here?
Well, there is a bit of a patchwork across the country in terms of the response. Each state, as you know, is responsible for enforcement and implementing laws that sit within inside their part of the Constitution, and that includes enforcement. So each state is activating what measures are necessary. They have their fine regimes. They're using their police service to do what they think is necessary. And obviously there is a higher rate in some states compared to others. So, yes, we do need to ensure that we maintain the fundamentals for each individual, but the action that is being taken is about every Australian, particularly those that are at high risk, and we need to be able to look them in the eye and say that we have done everything we possibly can to ensure their safety into the future and that we are reducing the risk to them from this terrible pandemic.
Just finally, interesting in the Australian Financial Review this morning that the government won't go down the path of a $1.4 billion loan to Virgin Australia. Should the government be cautious about this airline just falling over? There'll be a lot of Australians with flights already booked with Virgin. They were banking on getting credits back. We might be talking, I don't know the figure, but tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. That would be another hit. Would it be the best result for Virgin Australia to stay in the skies in Australia?
Tom, I've read the media reports this morning, as you've described, and I can tell you the Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister for Infrastructure, is in continual discussions with the airline industries. We've already put up $715 million as a broad-based support package, almost another $200 for regional airlines already, and those discussions will continue. I think it is important that we maintain 2 airline services in Australia, but obviously we've got to continue to work with all Australians and all industries to make sure we all come out of this together.
Right. So you said you had that conversation. Is it accurate that the $1.4 billion that Virgin is seeking is not on the table?
Tom, I'll never reveal confidential discussions, but we are all doing everything we can in regards of critical services. I know the Deputy Prime Minister is talking to the aviation industry constantly, every single day. It's the reason we did put up almost $1 billion in total for both regional and other domestic services to ensure we can continue with those critical connections, particularly to regional areas, because that's how people get in and out. That's how they bring in specialist services, particularly for health, and we need to make sure that that's maintained.
But is this something the government should take into account, that Virgin at the moment is providing a service? There's a lot of Australians already with an investment of sorts in Virgin, and even, if Ryanair is the replacement, which has been mooted, That's a budget carrier. Don't you need another flagship carrier to compete with Qantas?
Tom, we're doing everything we can to ensure that businesses continue in Australia. That's the reason we've announced the JobKeeper package, which is the biggest and most substantial investment in the Australian people I think that's ever been made. So I think particularly for small businesses and right across the board, that has provided a level of relief and comfort, and I think that's been very, very important.